Welcome back to the Trackstar Podcast, a conversation about music and culture centered around a playlist I've specifically created for our guests. Ever since the beginning of Trackstar, we've heard a huge fascination with CBGB, the iconic venue central to the growth of punk, new wave, and hardcore music.
CBGBs, dude.
CBGBs.
Yeah, right around the corner was CBGB's. CBGB's, you know, is right around the corner from here.
I know.
Coming up at CBGB's and drawing from the punk energy, the Talking Heads.
Talking Heads, iconic.
I love the Stooges. I love Iggy Pop.
I think Misfits is one of the best bands. It's New York. It's heavy.
Okay.
It's here.
We talked with artists who performed at CBGB, people who worked there, and we heard many stories about the beloved founder, Hilly Kristal.
Hilly was like an uncle to all of us. We were all troubled kids with nowhere to go, and he gave us a place to go.
We also got to attend CBGB Fest last year.
I got my spiky hair and my dog collar. I'm like, yeah!
In part one of our CBGB series, we focused on the early years of the venue and the rise of punk rock music. For part two, we're focused on the later years, the rise of New York hardcore, and we're going to be speaking with writer, record collector, and expert on American hardcore music, Stephen Blush.
I am all about intellectualized music. They were the bridge between punk and what became hardcore.
So the wall between the audience and the band is like torn down.
Exactly. Music is all about time and place.
Yeah.
CBGB's was the place, and that was the time.
You're in for a treat with this episode. Roll the intro.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Check, check.
Ready?
I'm ready.
Trackstar. Let's go.
I wish the world could be in these headphones right now.
I'm on the show. Have fun.
We're off to a very hot start here. Before we start with the music, can you just introduce yourself here?
Stephen Blush, here at Trackstar.
Well, we're here at your.
Oh, yeah.
This is your domain.
That's
We're
right.
surrounded by all your records.
I am all about intellectualized music, and here's my intellectualization right next to you.
This is a pretty serious collection.
Yep, there's a few people out there who are manic collectors. If you notice, all my records are organized. They're not on the floor. So I could actually find a record when I need it.
We just had this conversation the other day with Roberta Bailey. We were talking about the rise of CBGB and some of those early bands and the early scene there. And obviously that history is so intertwined with the history of New York City rock and roll. But that conversation kind of ended with in the late 70s. Mm-hmm. And it ended, I think, with the rise of hardcore and that scene interacting with CBGB.
Right.
So I want to talk to you about the rise, I guess, of hardcore and some of the other music that happened at CBGB throughout the early 80s and later on.
Right. Well, maybe I'll step back to reach that.
Yeah.
The music of CBGB's is the story of Hilly Kristal.
Mm-hmm.
And Hilly Kristal was like a violin player in opera. You have to understand what music was before it was like hardened rock, which I would say is the glam period and the punk period and the hardcore period and then the noise rock after that in the 90s. Back then it was about cabaret and pianos, piano bars and comedy. So Hilly had his whole history. We're in the middle of Greenwich Village now, and that's where his story really starts. Across the street, down on 9th Street and 6th Avenue, there was a place called The Lion where Barbra Streisand became famous. And he took that over as a piano bar. It was called Hilly's. That's where Bette Midler kind of broke. So then he had a little trouble with what was known as the Junior Mafia, which was the guy, I guess it was a lot of those guys who were in The Sopranos who would who would shake him down. So he moved over to West 12th Street. It became called Hilly's in the Village. And he ran that for a while. And then he decided to open Hilly's or Hilly's on the Bowery. And from that, it became known as CBGB's. While he was opening CBGB's, he was putting up a sign. And Terry Ork was the manager of a band called the Neon Boys. And this was late 1973. And as he's putting up the sign, Terry Ork's like, yeah, you got to have my band play on the band I'm working with. You have to have him play on Sunday nights, and he was not open on Sundays. So that band, the Neon Boys, was Richard Hell and Tom Verlaine, and that band turned into television. Early 1974, Sundays and Mondays was bands like Television and the Ramones and Patti Smith. And these people were all artists. They were artists making rock. And this is kind of like the first time this has ever really happened. So I think the reason that these people were so important was because they did bring this artistic flair to the music. And so that's 1973, 1974, 1975. You started having bands like the Tough Darts and the Dictators, which were like heavier bands, if that was the right word. So you're starting to see this direction of the music getting heavier and louder. This hadn't really existed before, at least to this degree. And then what you had moving forward, 1978, 1979, it's kind of like the end of punk rock, or at least the first wave of punk rock. So by 1980, CBGB's and Max's Kansas City, which were kind of rival bars, started booking a new breed of bands, and that became known as hardcore. The first bands were kind of transitional. They were younger bands. It would be like the Stimulators with Harley Flanagan of the Cro-Mags. And the Misfits were a really big part of this transition where they don't really fit this new hardcore thing that's happening. Nobody dressed up. And the Misfits, of course, are known for their the way they dress. You're starting to see the break of what's happening. Hardcore came a little bit later in New York. So you're talking about the Beastie Boys and Kraut and bands like that. And that's 1982, 1983. Doesn't sound like a big difference from the bands that were starting in 1980, but it's a long period of time until this starts happening. And in 1983, you have the start of the CBGB's matinees, which is very similar to what Hilly was doing with Sundays in the original days. But he had a matinee for all ages matinees. And that's where that all starts. And you see the rise of bands like Cro-Mags, Murphy's Law, Agnostic Front, very urban kind of bands. I had lived in Washington, D.C., before that, and a lot of the bands came from privilege. Senators' sons, television executives, people who worked on Capitol Hill. And New York was the first time where it was street kids. These were kids coming from nothing. Runaways, displaced kids, divorced families. So it was a much more street kind of music. There's one song that reminds me of an early Agnostic Front, which is about CBGBs. It's called Take Me Back, and it goes Cro-Mags, Warzone, Murphy's Law, Agnostic Front, sick of it all. Takes me back to CBGBs. This is where we started. That is the roots of New York hardcore.
You remember the first band that you saw at CBGB? Or one of the first?
I saw the Ramones. I saw the Ramones there. A friend of mine took me to see the Ramones. Uh-huh. I didn't really know that much about them. I'd seen their name. I'd seen their records, but I hadn't really made the break yet. I did not see them in 1974. It might have been about 1977. Of course, it was earth-shattering for me.
How'd they sound?
I was listening to a lot of like heavy metal at that time, Black Sabbath, and they kind of sounded like a really fast Black Sabbath to me. So I kind of, I related to it right away. But CBGB's was, as a club, was the first kind of sleazy, dirty rock club. The New York Rock Book, I was able to go back in history like before I was born, or before I came of age, let's say. And the Greenwich Village clubs were folk clubs. So they were kind of like cafes. And they were kind of, sleazy is not a word you would use for those places. So I think the first kind of sleazy rock club was CBGB's, and that was the model that clubs all around the country kind of followed afterwards, because you couldn't really have punk rock in a nice place.
So it's almost like there's two separate waves. What happened to the first wave? What happened to the televisions, to the Blondies, to the Talking Heads, to Ramones that were that original CBGB group?
They moved on.
Yeah.
They were no longer club bands.
Yeah.
They would play larger rooms. They were played on the radio, right? So
They wouldn't be able to play at CBGB.
right,
It's just too small.
It's just too small, exactly.
and sort of seedy in a neighborhood that a hugely popular MTV band is not
Right.
going to.
Right. And Hilly was never going to pay them near the amount of money that they wanted. He was still thinking about that they would play for low amounts of money because and the bands didn't really have any loyalty to him either. So it was kind of both. It was like they had moved on, but likewise they weren't going to come play for nothing. And then what you had after, I guess there's one thing between the punk and new wave and hardcore was what was known as no wave. And that was Lydia Lunch and the Contortions and everything that kind of leads up to Sonic Youth, noise bands. And that only really lasted for a couple of years as well. There was a record that Brian Eno produced called No New York. And that was a really important record, but the music didn't really sustain itself. The groups were basically playing a version of free jazz almost that didn't really translate to rock.
It's really experimental.
Yes, correct.
And it's harder to get an audience to like pay attention to it.
Yeah, I remember going to see James Chance, who from the Contortions, and being a 17-year-old, and I just didn't get it. I mean, I got the high energy and the violence on stage. I did get that.
Yeah.
But the music didn't speak to me. And I'm sure that was pretty much the case for lots of people. As I said, hardcore happened a little bit later in New York. What I found interesting about New York hardcore was that I had friends who were college graduates, master's degrees, doctorate degrees, and kids who didn't graduate from junior high school. And yet we were all part of the same scene, and we all spoke the same language, and we were all in it for the same reasons. Feeling like a misfit and finding yourself through this subculture. The important thing about hardcore was that it was anti-fashion.
Yeah.
Punk was fashion. Hardcore punk, while still connected, we called it hardcore punk because it was obviously still connected to punk. There was no fashion involved. I remember the first time I saw Black Flag, they were all in like dirty white T-shirts. Not even, there's no logos of bands or, there was just what you see is what you get. And I think that was really powerful. I think that really spoke to it. And I think CBGB's was a perfect place for that. CBGB's always had that to a degree, like with the Ramones, but yet the Ramones had a look.
Yeah.
But yet it was a very stripped down look. It was blue jeans and T-shirts and leather jackets, and so that was kind of a model for the CBGB's punk to come, and the CBGB's hardcore scene to come.
I want to play some songs for you and talk about them.
Okay.
And part of our objective here is to try and come up with a list of maybe 10 or so definitive artists for this period.
Yeah. You may want to get it on the table. I brought the 8-track tape of Live at CBGB's.
Wow.
Yeah. Of course, it was better known as an LP,
Yeah.
but the 8-track is just so rare.
Okay, so this is manufactured by Atlantic Recording Corporation.
Yeah, so Atlantic
Right?
Records
This is
put
pretty professional. Like,
Yeah.
why did they put this out?
Okay, so at CBGB's, they did something called, for 3 weeks, they recorded all the bands. They
Yeah.
called it the Unsigned Music Festival. And that was so radical at the time because unsigned bands didn't really get any traction. So this was a record of unsigned bands. The great song on that record is by Tough Darts. It's the opening track called It's All for the Love of Rock and Roll.
I don't care about the money, 'cause I ain't seen none. I don't care about the women, all I need is
Robert Gordon was the original singer of that band, and he kind of became known as a rockabilly singer. He used to work with Link Wray, who was a famous late 50s instrumentalist. But he quit the band right after that recording, so that's the only recording of Tough Darts with Robert Gordon.
And what is it? What kind of music is it? Like, what is Tough Darts?
It's
sound
like it's rock and roll.
Yeah.
It's like rock and roll with heavy guitar, because that's really what punk started as.
Yeah.
You know, even like the Sex Pistols or something like that was just a really heavy version of Chuck Berry or something, right? So music had become very complex in the 1970s, and there was this stuff called prog rock, and it was like bands like Yes and the original Genesis with Peter Gabriel, and it was just really complicated music.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't really get it. Like, it was just like Rush. There was just too much going on. There were too many notes. And when punk rock happened, like when the Ramones came around or when the Sex Pistols came around, it was just stripped down, 3-chord, no guitar solo. You know, it was refreshing.
Back to the basics.
Back to the basics. So you ask what Tough Darts are like, it's the same answer as the Ramones or the Sex Pistols or any of these bands. They're just stripped down rock and roll, bringing it back to where it was and where it should be, you know. And I think that's why punk rock never really stopped. You know, everyone talks about like punk dying, but it never really died. It went into different incarnations. But the bottom line is that it's easy music to understand and to get into. You know, so whether you're talking about Tough Darts and the Ramones, or you're talking about Green Day and Rancid,
Yeah.
it's still the same ethic.
Yeah.
You know, they're
And you don't have to be a virtuoso to play it.
right, exactly.
None of them
Yeah,
were, at least at the start.
no,
No one in the Ramones was that good at
Right.
their instruments.
Yeah. In fact, one of my favorite things that Hilly Kristal says in the New York Rock book is he says he thought the Ramones were like the worst band he ever saw because their music would go out of tune and then they'd yell at each other and fight and, you know. But that's rock and roll. So hardcore matinees at CBGB's made perfect sense, because it was the right music in the right place at the right time. Music is all about time and place.
Yeah.
CBGB's was the place, and that was the time.
Those are for you?
Okay.
I shuffle down the streets, my eyes are on my feet. I got
That was Stay With Me by the Dictators. That's one of their best songs. Handsome Dick Manitoba was the singer. He used to have the big afro. We would call it the Isro because it was a Jewish afro. And he was into wrestling and he was into White Castle burgers. So he really like was way ahead of the curve, you know. It was kind of like that trashy, you know, thing that rock and roll became. And they were the Dictators were from the Bronx.
Yeah.
Remember, I was talking before about bands being from the outer boroughs, and they were one of the first CBGB's bands. They may have made the first punk record. because their first records came out in 1975 and 1976. And Ramones came out a little bit concurrent, but a little bit later. We're talking months here. And, in England, they always talk about 1977. So this was like 1975. So they were the first ones signed to a major label. I think they were the lowest selling record in Columbia Records history, if I'm not mistaken. But you should wear that with pride, because that's kind of hard to do. But a great band, really important CBGB's band.
Do they bridge from the early period of CBGB into? Do they stick around? Are they still part of it?
No,
later?
they would be considered a original CBGB's band. They're basically, I would say, their heyday is 1975 to 1978. I remember seeing them. That was we would talk about big moments in one's life musically, and I was really into a band that spanned Blue Oyster Cult, who were one of the original heavy metal bands, if you will.
Yeah.
And the opening band was the Dictators, and they got booed off stage. And then afterwards, I was hanging out with them, and they signed all my Blue Oyster Cult records that I was trying to get autographed. In the meantime, Blue Oyster Cult just blew us off and went into their limos, and and I just remember thinking, like, here's these like short little guys just blowing us off, and here's this new kind of band who I never really heard before. So my first time seeing the Dictators was opening for Blue Oyster Cult. Great band. Dictators, great band.
Underrated band.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll go a little bit later.
That's the Stimulators. So the Stimulators are kind of the bridge between punk and what became hardcore. And also they had a 12-year-old drummer named Harley Flanagan.
Yeah.
And that was unbelievable because he was 12 or 13 playing drums in this band they kind of had a punk look. They weren't quite as fast as the Bad Brains to Come.
Yeah.
But they were the bridge. They were the bridge in New York where the crowds were 13 to 15-year-old kids, which was so radical at the time. I remember seeing them and being amazed that I'd be like 15 or 16 and I'd be like one of the older kids in the crowd. And again, having this 12-year-old drummer who would later go on to help create this second generation of New York hardcore with the Cro-Mags. Harley Flanagan was like the toughest kid I'd ever met. He was one of these people who didn't graduate from junior high school that I referred to, but yet very smart. Connected. He grew up in the same building as Allen Ginsberg. So he was coming at it from a pretty high intellectual level, although you wouldn't really consider it heavily intellectual, especially considering the amount of power violence that was coming from this relatively small kid. He was like a feral animal, and he would kick ass at these CBGB's matinees, like just totally terrifying kid, and who I became friends with, many years later.
Okay, I got to interrupt Steven for a second because over the summer we got a chance to speak with Harley Flanagan at CBGB Fest, and he shared with us a little bit of his experience attending the venue and playing music as young as 6 years old.
Introduce yourself.
My name's Harley Flanagan. I'm from the Cro-Mags, and we're playing here under the bridge, CBGB style.
I want to know about CBGB from you and your experience.
CBGB's is, without a doubt, the most legendary underground rock and roll club in the world. Without CBGB's, we wouldn't have so much of what music is now. He gave, one of Hilly's only criterias was you got to play your own music. And he didn't care if it sucked. You know, thus, the punk rock movement was born there because people really got an opportunity to learn how to play. First time I went there, I was 6 years old with my mom and my aunt Denise, who was in a punk rock band called the Stimulators. It was the year it opened, and I didn't realize that until Hilly told me that like years later. He was like, that was the year we opened. And I actually played there from the 70s through the 80s, through the 90s, 2000s. I even played it the last weekend, 2006. So it's like part of my life, man.
From day one.
From day one, man. I practically, it was like an extra room to my house that I would just appear in and watch shows and play at.
What made playing there different from playing in other places?
People got away with a lot of there that they wouldn't get away in other clubs. One of the first punk bands I saw there was the Dead Boys. And CB's back then used to have seats bolted into the ground, like movie theater seats, all the way to the front row of the stage.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize that. And the singer, Steve Baders, he came crawling out on stage, like looking all fucking weird. And he pulled out a jar from his jacket and unscrewed it and doused the audience with bugs. Now, the people in the crowd, most of them were not punks. They were just people who went to see some live music. You know, they were just like randos, you know, just like, so you got all these like pretty straight, normal people just like, like freaking out. Chicks are screaming, jumping up out of the fucking seats. And I'm standing on the side of the stage, 12-year-old me, laughing my fucking ass off. I got my spiky hair and my dog collar. I'm like, ah! The show ended with him hoisting himself up to the lights with a noose around his ankle and dropping himself headfirst on broken glass until they had to take him to the hospital. And of course, he came back and did the second set. So, you know, so at CB's, you might see any
When do the crowds in CBGB start moshing and pushing each other in the same time period?
Yeah,
Or
well,
earlier?
there was already slam dancing happening on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And it was incredibly violent. So I think the combination of Washington, D.C. and all the bands that were coming from the West Coast and D.C. and playing these CBGB's matinees, I think it was just obvious. And it all kind of, everyone had already seen this movie, The Decline and Fall of Western Civilization by Penelope Spheris, which was, you saw the violence, you know, first and foremost. The slam dancing and the moshing came known as, comes from just, that was the attraction of hardcore, you know? People like to intellectualize it, but the fact that music was so violent and you could get on the stage and, you know, dive off the stage or, you know, grab the singer and sing along with them, or, you know, music used to be very much like, you know, like 50th row kind of music. Like you would sit like way behind and watch the bands and, you know, sit there and think about what a genius this guitar player was, or, you know, that was the old way of thinking. This was the new breed.
So the wall between the audience and the band is like torn down.
Exactly.
And it becomes one. And that's part of the reason the community is so strong.
Yeah, exactly.
Is they really feel like they're interconnected. They're not better than you. They're the same as you.
Yep.
And everyone's in it together.
100%.
All these bands.
100%.
Whereas television was cooler than you and better than you.
Yeah, yeah. Because they were...
Patti Smith was definitely cooler than you.
Yeah. And you felt that.
Yeah.
But then again, the music was so different, you know, and that's what made those bands interesting, was that they weren't Rush, right? So they were different. And then the next step of it was the kids taking over.
Yeah.
Which, of course, the Roberta Baileys of the world didn't like. But it was, the kids will have their say.
Yeah.
You know, was what SSD Control used to say. And that's really what it was, you know?
Do you have a favorite show that you saw there?
I gotta say some of the most life-changing shows for me there was when the Bad Brains first started playing there, when they first started coming down from Washington, D.C., because that really changed the direction of punk rock to more of a hardcore vibe. So
People say it's like they were levitating because of like how
they made me levitate. First time I saw them, I don't even think like people even knew how to react. I know I couldn't. I was like, it was shocking. And we went out in the streets and just started like blocking traffic and breaking like, because we were just like, ah, game changer.
So now you played the Bad Brains. Bad Brains are really important in the history of New York hardcore. Basically, they're the start of New York hardcore. They actually come from Washington, D.C., where I used to live, so I was familiar with them and was a huge fan of them already. They were produced by a guy named Jerry Williams, who was a really important producer. He produced the Cro-Mags. He produced the Beastie Boys. A lot of people don't really get the Beastie Boys connection to hardcore, but that's how they started. If you find a single by them called Pollywog Stew, that's the original Beastie Boys playing hardcore. And the connection between the Bad Brains and the Beastie Boys was very tight. In fact, their both initials are BB, and they both hung out together. And supposedly the Daryl Jennifer of the Bad Brains named them the Beastie Boys. But regardless, it was a very tight connection. They used to hang out on Avenue A. There was a place called 171A, which was a studio at 171 Avenue A, which is Avenue A and 11th Street. It was really where you get this, you'd probably call it the second wave of New York hardcore.
Yeah.
It wasn't the Stimulators, and it wasn't Kraut, and it wasn't really Heart Attack, which was Jesse Mallin's band. While they were all connected to this is where the start of Cro-Mags, Murphy's Law, Agnostic Front come into play. While the Bad Brains were promoting Rastafarianism, Jerry Williams was kind of like the intellectual anchor to that. And their shows at CBGB's. Again, CBGB's always comes back into play here. And Bad Brains are the start of the New York hardcore scene that we know today.
Why did they move to New York? Why leave DC? If DC was sort of a birthplace, right? I guess hardcore starts on the West Coast in Southern California and a little bit in DC. It emerges at the same time and comes to New York later. Why move to New York?
It's kind of funny, but there was this like self-help book called Think and Grow Rich. And the Bad Brains were really obsessed with this book. And part of it was like move to a big city, make it big. So that's kind of what they did. So it's really kind of the story of this self-help book, Think and Grow Rich.
Isn't there like an irony in that, in hardcore and the hardcore scene and trying to think and grow rich, right? Isn't it a little bit of a rejection of? Yeah,
well, this is where the Bad Brains were different than all the other bands. Well, they were black for one.
Yeah.
And they had just a different way of thinking, you know? So, you are correct. But the Bad Brains were on their own trip.
So the Bad Brains become really influential.
Yeah.
And when I listen to Bad Brains, as someone who's not as steeped in hardcore music, I hear it sounds sonically similar to a lot of the rest of these bands. Different, maybe a little bit faster, but you see this signature that you don't see with some of the other bands we talked about earlier. All sound kind of different. And then hardcore also kind of sounds like in the same universe.
Well, a lot of the original punk people, this was their problem with hardcore. It all sounds the same. But that's kind of the point. You know, so it's kind of like you're taking punk and you're kicking it up a notch. right? We didn't go to art school. I mean, I didn't even know. I was into the band Bauhaus and had no idea it had anything to do with architecture.
Yeah.
Like, no clue. That's where we were coming from, you know. The only art I knew was album covers. The first hardcore record, there's kind of a debate on which it is. There was a band called The Middle Class from Orange County, California, and there was the Bad Brains Pay to Come single in Washington, D.C. And what it was just the Ramones music kicked up a notch. So the Bad Brains became like leaders of this East Coast hardcore explosion. Plus they were black. Plus they were like, used to be like, they were phenomenal musicians, which was another part of it, which was strange that like, they were so musical in what they did. They used to be jazz fusion players. So they kind of took their jazz fusion thing and turned it inside out into this, with this punk influence, and created their own sound. And that's the sound that everyone tried to imitate or follow for years to come.
Steven mentions that Bad Brains paved the way for the New York hardcore scene and bands like Cro-Mags, Agnostic Front, and Murphy's Law. Coincidentally, last summer we got to speak with Jimmy Drescher, the founder and lead singer of the band Murphy's Law. Check this out.
Can you tell me about CBGB? For you, what it means to you?
For me, it helped the birth of New York hardcore music, which is the form of music my band plays. And we started at a club called A7 in the Lower East Side of Manhattan on Avenue A and 7th Street. And that was an after-hours club, and we were young kids spending the night there. And then Hilly found like a dead zone in the club Sunday afternoon. So he opened it up to us, and we had CBGB's matinees. So Hilly was like an uncle to all of us. You know, we'd be running through the street. We're all troubled kids with nowhere to go, and he gave us a place to go. The matinees opened it up for us to be in a club on a stage with a sound system and a sound man, as opposed to playing in a after-hours club, and make music and create and make art and make merchandise and shirts. And, you know, now from a teenager to 60 years old, I'm still doing it, and it's my life. And he helped me, hone my life, what I do and I love, and a lot of other musicians as well. So he was a really special man.
In interest of time, we have basically Cro-Mags, Murphy's Law, Youth of Today, Gorilla Biscuits, Sick of It All, U.S. Chaos, Misfits.
Absolutely.
Kind of different though, right?
Right.
Not really hardcore.
The Misfits were unique in that they were nothing like the hardcore bands, but yet they were embraced by the hardcore scene. Eventually, they became a hardcore band. They're all their famous singles that you could buy for $5,000 to $10,000 now. Those really weren't hardcore. And the other thing about the real thing that separated the Misfits from the other hardcore bands was that they had a really good singer.
Yeah.
I mean, Glenn Danzig is a tremendous singer. He's like Elvis Presley, really. I mean, he just did a record of Elvis covers, and he's the only guy who could do that. And they dressed up, they spent so much money and time and effort on their clothes and all that stuff. But
so a lot of the hardcore singers are, and it sounds, no matter who the band is, they sort of sound the same way.
Right.
Whereas Danzig sounds like Roy Orbison or
Right.
Elvis or someone like that. And so it's just, you can't even think about it as hardcore because of that.
Correct. They finally arrived at hardcore. They made their final album of the original lineup was called Earth AD.
Yeah.
And that's where they arrive as a hardcore band. They're also playing hardcore by that point. So, but I mean, you want to give me a list of 10 top bands, I probably couldn't do it exactly for you right now, but the Misfits would have to be in there. There's a reason that they're selling out stadiums and arenas right now because they are that good. I mean, and they're from Jersey, so.
Sonic Youth.
She keeps coming closer, saying
Sonic Youth are a really important band. They come out of the no wave scene.
Yeah.
And they were also very important in the rise of alternative rock. They were kind of like the glue that got all these bands to the next level, like Nirvana. A very important band in the growth of the network that became punk to hardcore to alternative rock. Super important. So they deserve their props for all that.
When that happens and alternative and grunge rises in the 90s, does CBGB change and evolve? Does it become part of that, or is it?
There was a time where in the 90s where CBGB's was just another club.
Yeah.
It didn't really, a lot of people would say it was unimportant, but I don't think that's correct, because that's where all your, that's where you saw all your grunge bands the first time through. And grunge, I don't think people really get it about grunge, is that was hard rock meets punk and hardcore. That's where all that stuff mixes together. All the stuff I'm talking about, Black Sabbath into Black Flag, that's grunge. Those kids. I was friends with a lot of the grunge bands. I was tight with almost all of the Seattle bands, because they all had a hardcore connection. I remember going to Seattle on tour. I was on tour with a lot of bands back then, meaning the 80s. Soundgarden opened for hardcore bands. Nirvana opened for hardcore bands. Mudhoney was a band called Green River that used to always open for hardcore bands. Pearl Jam was a band called Deranged Diction. A couple of the guys from Green River. A couple of the guys from the U-Men. They all opened for hardcore bands. So it's like that was the common language.
Melvins was one of Kurt's favorite bands.
There you go. And they were all part of that too.
So what's the last CBGB, the last great CBGB band?
I mean, this is going to be in our discussion that nobody could really answer about what the great last hardcore bands were. But right as the same time as Sub Pop, there was a label called Amphetamine Reptile, or AmRep. There's bands like Helmet.
Yeah. I had Helmet on here.
Okay, great. There you go. See, you got it.
Your contribution left unnoticed.
Helmet was a super important band. They created that kind of mechanized guitar sound that pretty much everyone does now. In fact, I went to go see them. They opened for Gwar and the Dwarves a couple of weeks ago. I went to that show. I was listening to Helmet, and I'm going like, this could be like any band, but these guys started it, right? These guys started those kind of riffs.
Who do you like now? Are there any great New York rock bands or rock bands in general?
There probably are that I'm not really paying attention to.
You're listening to the old stuff still.
Yeah, honestly. I find that I'm still catching up on all the music history, because music history's gone by so fast, that the world is just now catching up. I mean, I think the last band I probably paid attention to was, is it 10 plus years ago was Yeah Yeah Yeahs? Nick Zinner.
Probably more. Even.
Probably more. Probably 15, 20. That's scary. But Nick Zinner and those guys, I mean, that was a great band.
What's your next book?
I've just recently written a trilogy called, I have a friend who writes for Le Monde in France, and he called it the Lord of the Rings of rock and roll. And it was when rock met disco, and last year was when rock met reggae, and coming out this February is when rock met hip hop. And when rock met hip hop, like all these books, it's not really the story of disco or reggae or hip hop. It's like when the two mixed. So when the Beastie Boys came out with License to Ill, and they're playing with Kerry King from Slayer, or when Run DMC and Aerosmith get together, or when Public Enemy and Anthrax get together, or the bands with the mixed sounds, like be it the Red Hot Chili Peppers or Faith No More, or most importantly, Rage Against the Machine. So that's the history that's coming out now, and I'm very excited about that book. And it's getting good press already. So there we go.
Thanks for taking the time and talking to us.
Yeah, it was great.
Hopefully the first of many.
Yeah,
We'll have to do a full Rock Meets Hip Hop
yeah. Well,
episode.
we'll hook it up if you want to do it.
The Trackstar Podcast is a presentation of Public Opinion created by me, Jack Coyne, Kieran Coyne, and Henry Cornaros. Written and produced by Noah John. Edited and produced by Haley Sobel. Theme and original composition by Kieran Coyne. Mixing by Devin Klein. Our agent is Joanna Orland at UTA. Thanks for listening. See you next Wednesday.